Today's conversation is with Aaron Straker, a nutrition and training coach. We talk about nutrition science, eating healthy when traveling, and pro tips when shopping at Costco. So I want to kick things off by taking you back to 2014. You were doing the CrossFit Games, you were listening to Chief Keef and eating a paleo diet. Tell me about a highlight and a low light from that time from either a nutrition or training standpoint.
I will start. Let's start with the lowlights. So 2014, I had at the end of 2013, I ruptured my Achilles in the gym training. And it's one of those injuries like you don't, I mean, like with a lot of injuries, but I went from like riding a high of lifting weights with my friends, at 5 p.m. after I didn't have a corporate job. I was fortunate. I worked in startups and stuff, but like I think life was good. And then like overnight, gym's gone. Overnight, I'm immobile. I can't drive my truck. I get depressed. I'm unhappy. You know what I mean? Like it was rough. So 2014, I was like, right, like getting back into the gym and being able to train again, like going from like a low into like highs, what ended up being competing at the CrossFit regional and all that sort of thing. So it was that injury that led me to learn about nutrition because I had time on my hands, where I was like, I mean, you remove the gym and I started working from home because I couldn't drive. It was my right leg. And I just had a lot more time on my hands. I was like, I want to learn something. So like nutrition was what I started to learn. And it was really eye-opening how ass backwards a lot of my preconceived, notions around nutrition and things were. So I would say that would be the low light of that time that kind of started a highlight. And then the highlight of that was that Chief Keef album was the album was out, I think, in like 2013 or 2012. So it was a little bit dated at that point, but we listened to it a lot. The gym was on a first floor, and on the second floor was like a real estate office, and they hated us because we'd come in at like, and I think it was 4 p.m. when we actually trained. And it was like the competition class, and we were just like slamming barbells and stuff, and like the whole building would shake. And we were screaming all the time, and it was so much fun from my standpoint, but I couldn't imagine the hell that was the other businesses that were in that that business unit there.
So did you enjoy kind of the community aspect at CrossFit? Like what drove you to it and what did you enjoy about it at the time?
Yeah, what I enjoyed about it is I was in Southern California in San Diego, and there's a lot of like military and that sort of thing there. You go from playing sports in, high school, something like that. I played intramural sports at university, and then you get dumped into like the real world. You're 23 or 24 years old, and it's just like, okay, you go to work now, and like everything else you did is like you don't do anymore. And then there was like CrossFit, and it was a way to compete and be an athlete again.
Mm.
And there was a very certain type of person that resonated with that. So we had like, there's like 20 of us that were all, 22 to like 25, 26 years old. We would show up, we would train really hard, push each other. It was like a very, very conducive environment. And everyone was in like that same phase of their life. We're into early adulthood, burgeoning careers and stuff, but still want to be like athletes and train and that sort of thing.
Cool. So you mentioned, looking into nutrition at that time. I think you mentioned kind of two books, like one of the OG RP diet books and Lyle
Yep.
McDonald's flexible dieting.
Yep.
Maybe tell me about what your main takeaways from each are.
The main takeaway, and especially at that time, and I think it helps if I back up a little bit. At that point in time, the CrossFit narrative, and I'm very far removed from CrossFit at this at in 2024, but at that time it was carbohydrates are evil, they're the devil, don't have sugar, these sorts of things. It's the high fat, the bacon, black coffee is like your pre-workout sort of thing. Like that was the narrative at that time. And I don't think that the narrative was necessarily bad because CrossFit was trying to like, kind of get its feet into your standard American, right? I think that knowledge or that information can be beneficial for that context. The problem is that got misapplied to competitive CrossFit. which is the most glycolytic modality you can practically do except for sprinting. So you have people who are training at very high volumes, 6 days per week, eating 100 grams of carbs per day, wondering why at the end of a 40-minute, chipper workout, they can't get off the ground for 40 minutes. And the answer is because they're going hypoglycemic because they don't need any fucking carbohydrate. So it was like when I'm reading these books and at that time, unless you did go through books, you're getting your information from like, the one coach who went to his like weekend, L1 sort of thing. You're getting like multiple levels of like information distilled down. And what I loved about those two particular books, it was like the first RP Renaissance periodization, like diet book, and then Lyle McDonald's like Guide to Flexible Dieting, which he wrote in like 2004, 2005 or something like that. Excuse me. It's all evidence-based. It's like, if you're doing these exercise modalities past the anaerobic threshold, like you are oxidizing carbohydrate as a fuel source. Like you need to be eating carbohydrate. And it was like the world opened up to me because I was that person who would like just crash in the middle of workouts and wonder why I just like cannot keep going. Once I got to like the 15, 18 minute mark and I was like dragging ass and stuff so hard. And I was like, oh, here are the answers. Like I'm eating not for my goal, so that it was really pivotal in that understanding of like, it's like, oh, there is a science to this. There's actual nutrition science, not just eat healthy and try hard sort of thing. And for me, that was just like a like world opened up pretty much.
So you mentioned, like adding in carbohydrates, but did you learn anything about calories and how calories work that you apply to your day-to-day now?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it covered everything from like your energy needs and, obviously if you're in if you want to gain, you need to be in a caloric surplus deficit, obviously, or lose body fat, the deficit. I mean, it covered the macronutrients and calories, and they were both very objective in their dissemination of information in them.
Okay. And you mentioned that, the day that your calorie deficit started was the day you stopped having a tiny cookie coffee. Can you
Yes.
explain that in as much detail as possible?
Yeah. So I mean, and this is something I adopted this year. I was not adopting that back then when I was using like macros and flexibly and those sorts of things. And I would say when it all depends on the context of your goals, right? If your goal is like, hey, I want to be like a healthy body composition, I want to like feel good about myself and be healthy, which I'm using air quotes because it's decently subjective, right? Though I don't think there's any reason why you should not have the cookie, small cookie that comes with your coffee. When you are pursuing the best that you can possibly pursue, right? That cookie that comes with a coffee is a metaphor for a crack in the dam of a little compromise that you make. And once that first crack is in that dam, right? Like with that, like that's how dams work. Like pressure builds, you're going to be in that you're going to be in that same exact situation again. And you're like, well, on Saturday I compromised. Why would I not compromise today? And it's a very slippery slope. And again, objectively, I don't think the cookie really matters. It's 40 calories or something like that. That's very simple to make up for the day. But what it does for your mindset, you're either like sharpening your sword in your conviction or or it's getting duller. And over time, like those each of those respective situations that you find yourself in, they do add up because by the end of it, after I said no to the cookie the first like 2 or 3 times, like it wasn't even a question anymore. I would just like flick it off my plate, sort of thing. I was like, I don't need that.
Yeah, I think for the general population, it's still a good metaphor because you may go and say to yourself, I'm not going to have that cookie. And then if you have the cookie, you're going against what you're telling yourself. So I think that's important. I think that's different than if you're going to a birthday and you tell yourself ahead of time, I'm going to have a slice of cake, and you have the slice of cake, then at least you're doing what you told yourself you would do. I think where people slip or they crack is when they have an expectation of what they're going to do and then they don't meet that need with themselves. So I think that metaphor still does work.
Oh yeah, it's huge. It's absolutely huge.
Right. So I think one thing you have really good insight would be is traveling. You live kind of as a digital nomad and have traveled to, many places. I think one thing I found interesting is you talked about doing like a really long road trip from Arizona to Virginia and eating at different places like Texas Roadhouse, Chipotle, etc. Um, what are your Mount Rushmore, your top 4 tips to give the average person on how they can eat healthier when they're traveling?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It depends on where you're going. Um, Fortunately, if you're like using that same example, driving across the United States, taking one of the major highways, like Google Maps has this incredible feature called search along route, you know, and you can be like, okay, I want to, where's Chipotle? Like, where's the next like 3 Chipotles? And in Google Maps will tell you how far out they are. And then you can plan that, like, okay, maybe we had breakfast at 8 a.m. I want lunch somewhere around midday. Hey, there's a Chipotle in like 2.5 hours. It's
Mm.
1 mile off the highway. Like, you can plan it pretty easily. Um, so that's one thing. Knowing what you're kind of looking for also helps. Like another time, I really wanted like a Japanese kind of hibachi style thing. So we're like, okay, we know we want to do this Tuesday night for dinner. So by I was my girlfriend and I, when we were on that trip, you just plug it in the search along route, and like it will give you what you're looking for. You just have to plan, far enough in advance. And then another really beautiful thing about the United States is, depending on where you are, right? Again, some of the gas stations are incredible. Like, there's some chains along the East Coast, like Sheets and what's the other one? Wawa. There's like Bucky's in Texas,
Yeah.
and then there's other ones that are escaping me right now. You can find pretty good setups in there. You're gonna find some version of like an RTD protein drink that's gonna be get you 25 to like 40 grams of protein. Most of them have like bananas or apples or some sort of fruit, and then some of them are gonna have even like salads or different things like that. Like, it's out there if you know what you're looking for, and you plan a little bit. But it's the what gets people is they don't plan, and then they're like, I'm starving, it's been 8 hours since I've eaten anything, and there's a McDonald's on the corner, like, that's where I'm going. So like with most things in life, if you plan, things will work out generally the way that you would like them to.
Okay. So let's take 2 examples. First, let's take Chipotle. Um, if someone's going to Chipotle, how do they make better decisions at Chipotle in the context that they are, like an intermediate lifter trying to either maintain or lose weight?
Well, those are two very different things. Are we maintaining, or are we losing weight?
Let's say we're maintaining.
Okay. So we're maintaining, which means we have some auto regulation, built in. And what I mean by auto regulation is, some days food's going to be a little bit up, some days food's going to be a little bit down, but neither is going to be far enough in deviation for consistent of enough time period for you to have a substantial increase or decrease in body weight, right? Your weight might float up 2 pounds, it might float down 2 pounds, but that auto regulatory rhythm keeps you pretty much about the same. So in something like that, if someone is maintaining, it's going to be, I like the burrito bowl set up there,
Okay.
because let's face it, if you're going with an actual burrito, you're going to get the tortilla, you're going to get rice, you're going to get beans. Maybe you put some of the vegetables in there. That's easily like 130 grams of carbohydrate right there. You
Mhm.
probably do not need a 130 grams of carbs in your lunch, if maintenance is your goal, right? Unless you're, a bigger guy or something like that, or have a very, very high output. So I'm typically steering most clients towards like the burrito bowl.
Okay.
Get rice, get the beans that you would like. Um, Maybe, obviously chicken, the steak. I think they have a new version of steak. It's been about a year since I've been in the States, so I'm not up to date on the latest Chipotle marketing plans
Yeah.
there. And then typically I have clients kind of choose their battles with fats. I'm like, we can do some cheese, but then we're going to hold off on the sour cream sort of thing. Or if you really want the sour cream, we're going to hold off on cheese. Um, Fats is where I typically have people just be a little bit more vigilant, because it's very easy for them to really kind of hockey stick if you're eating out, frequently and not paying attention. You can easily put down, 40 grams of fat in a meal, and you do that 2 or 3 times, and your fats are quite high on the day, especially if you're not going to purposefully control your carbohydrate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you could just make a couple small substitutions and still enjoy a meal at Chipotle, like going to the
Yeah,
bowl, having less cheese or no cheese. And then you can still go to town on things like salsa, which are low calorie and pretty much vegetables and
ex-
delicious.
exactly.
And how about something like a Texas Roadhouse?
Mhm.
If someone, finds themselves in that type of environment and they're trying to cut, um, what do you think they should be looking at when they look at the menu, and are there any substitutions they should be trying to make better decisions at a restaurant like that?
Oh yeah, like a Texas Roadhouse could be incredible. You're going to go with a leaner cut of steak, so you don't want the ribeye, you don't want like the New York strip, although New York strip isn't like bad, but you really want a tenderloin. You want a tenderloin or a sirloin. Those are going to be the leanest cuts you have there. You're going to ask for a side of steamed vegetables, which is very very simple, and then you're going to get the baked potato, but you're going to get it without the bacon bits, without the sour cream, without the butter. I depending on how you are, like you could do a little bit of butter or something like that. I'm lactose intolerant, so I won't do that for everyone else's sake and my own. But it is quite simple. You pick a primary protein source that's low in fat, which is going to be that tenderloin or that sirloin. You pick a primary starchy carbohydrate, which is going to be that baked potato, and you add some vegetables to it just to get a little bit of extra fiber and food volume, because the context is that person is in a calorie deficit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think asking for steamed vegetables is a good move because sometimes you might get the sautéed vegetables and there's like 4 tablespoons of butter or oil in there. So although you're
Yeah.
getting the fiber from the vegetables, it may actually be hard to track how many calories you had if you're in a deficit because there's just
Yeah.
so much fat, right?
Yep.
And even with steak, you can ask them to like use less butter or something if you
Hmm.
are extra vigilant on it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's with a few simple requests, it's quite wild how well of a meal you can produce out of a Texas Roadhouse or a Outback Steakhouse, or really any steakhouse. Like, it can be absolutely wonderful. It just takes a few requests, knowing what kind of cut of steak to order, and it's a pretty damn decent meal.
Yeah, I think the easy tip for steak is like if it has the word loin in it, it's probably leaner.
Yep.
And then just asking for things on the side is good, right? So if you're getting that baked potato and you want butter, ask for butter on the side instead of on top of it. If you're getting salad, get the dressing on side, because otherwise they're probably going to like make it rain on the salad, and it
Yep.
won't
That
really be a
that
salad anymore.
exactly. Getting your dressing on the side is the difference between like using half of a tablespoon and like three on your salad.
For sure. So I think, yeah, just
Yeah.
making some of these small changes makes a big difference, especially for your kind of average person who does eat out socially, and they're gonna they're gonna have that in their lifestyle. They're not gonna live out of Tupperware and do meal prep all the time because that's not
Hmm.
in alignment with what their goals are,
Exactly.
especially if they're traveling. Cool. So one thing I found interesting and I agree with is that you said when you look big is when you're small, and when you're big, you look small. Can you
Yep.
explain that in some more detail for the average person who doesn't understand that concept and thinks they need to bulk as a first step when maybe they don't need to?
Yeah, I mean, it's literally it's the fallacy. I shouldn't really say fallacy. It's like the cloak of body fat. Like, many people, they just do not simply understand body fat. Of course, everyone understands like what fat is and what body fat is, but it's like the less body fat you have, once you get to a quite a lean level, let's call it under 12% as a male. For any of the females listening, you're going to be about 8 to 10% higher is a pretty considerable comparison reference range. Under 12%, you might start to get some ab definition and that sort of thing. Under 10%, you're probably going to start getting some of the like veins coming into the legs a little bit and abs. And that's where you start looking like huge, even though objectively your weight is like way lower and you're actually smaller. Your clothes are fitting a little bit baggier. Your compression shorts might start to get a little bit loose around the waist and in the legs and stuff, but you just have significantly less body fat. So you can actually see the muscle definition, which makes you look like you're huge. And it's really just this kind of illusion because you appear large, but you're not. You're objectively like substantially smaller than when you were like in your building phase or muscle growth phase or something like that. And it's literally just body fat.
And how do you use that knowledge with your clients when setting up goals with them, when they might say right away, I want to be 200 pounds, because in their mind, like that's what being jacked is. Like, how do you coach them into understanding, what are your actual goals and figuring out where they should be?
Yeah. So I'm one thing with me is I'm just completely transparent, right? Um, Fortunately, I've been in the game long enough, and I've been had enough victories and stuff where I don't have to like give a client what they want or sell them what they want, sort of thing. I'm just like, if someone's like, hey, I'm 160 pounds and I want to be 200 pounds and like shredded, and we have 12 months, and I'm like, you need to go find someone who's going to pump you full of gear, because that's
There's
the
no
only way
way
that's going to
otherwise.
happen.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel like it's the only way that
How
will
about a
happen.
decade? And then even then, it might not be that easy.
Yeah. Yeah. So um I'll just be honest. So if a male comes to me and he's like, hey, maybe they're 180 pounds, right? And we're 15% body fat. At 15% body fat, you're not going to have any abs. You might have like a little bit of like the main bicep vein still kind of showing. Like, I want to be 200 pounds. And the first thing I'm like, okay, but you're going to be fatter than you are right now. And they're like, oh, well, I don't really want that. I'm like, okay, what do you want?
Yeah. Do
So,
you want
and then,
3 to 4 inches on your waist? Yes or no?
yeah, because like we can put weight on, like you're going to get fatter. And then eventually we're going to have to diet a lot of that off. And you're not looking at an 8-week summer shred. You're looking at 6 months of dieting, of consistent wins week over week to get you down into that. And like, I don't really want that. I'm like, okay, so we know what we don't want. Let's work through the paces a little bit to find out like what we do want. And typically 8 out of 10 times people just want a physique that is representative that they lift weights, because they do lift, they put a lot of time and effort into it, and they feel like their physique is not an accurate representation of the work that they put in, and they want what they feel like is an accurate representation, but they are falsely connecting that to a number on the scale. And it's that's like one use case that it presents itself, but it's also much more common with like women, right? And they're like, I want to be, in high school or whatever, I was 132 pounds, and I want to get back to 132 pounds, and they make that number mean something. And then what I'll kind of send them, or a way that I'll combat it, I was like, okay, send me a picture, of like what your kind of goal physique is. And they'll send me that kind of sample photo. I'm like, okay, we look like this, but you're 135 pounds, 137 pounds. How do you feel? Like, oh, I don't care. I just want to look like that. I'm like, okay. So that number is just something that you made up, that you remember, like my life, I felt good about myself when I was X. I want to get back to X. X is just like what their connection was, but it's like really like they want to look a certain way. And when I explain it, I was like, if we look like that, does it matter what you weigh? They're like, no, I don't care. Like, okay, we have a physique that we are after. So, and many times it's just helping clients or whoever you're communicating with understand their goals a little bit better than they think they do. So that's a big part of it for sure.
For sure. And I can relate to that. I know my first time I was really focused on the scale and the weight. And over time, it's more about my progress pictures and my waist measurement. And the scale matters less because, people aren't weighing me on the day-to-day basis, but that waist measurement and, other measurements as well as progress pictures, like that's how you know if you look and feel good.
Yeah. I mean, it's a proxy over enough delta, but it's not a live and die sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So people may not know this, but you started your career in software development, and I think you were even an early adopter of Ethereum. So as you see the world of tech playing out, what are you more excited from a nutrition perspective, AR, AI or VR AR?
I would say, can, can I say neither? If I'm being honest,
Yeah, tell me why.
um, yeah, well, the AR VR, it's something I haven't really seen too much of. I obviously have seen the new brand new Apple. Is it called the Vision Pro? Is that what
Yeah,
they're
the
calling
Vision
it?
Pro.
And like from a work stuff, I'm like, okay, I kind of see this could be pretty cool. Like people just working on the subway and that sort of thing. I'm like, okay, I see utility in that. Like that's kind of cool. The AI stuff, I in its current implementations, which I will be frank, I think the current AI coaches, they're not really AI. They're just like pretty detailed like algorithmic decision making trees. Like macro factors one, I believe Lane Norton has the like carbon diet coach. Um, in being someone who I have this very interesting set. I can't say set of skills because my coding skills are long gone. Um, but being having spent large chunks of my life in both of those worlds, communicating this from like the nutrition coach sort of thing into like the software developer, like building constraints against that, it's incredibly challenging. And you end up with decisions, right? A decision tree, but there's massive trade-offs because some of the like the AI, coaching apps and stuff, they can enforce like kind of bad habits where, hey, we missed the mark because I, binged over the weekend sort of thing and went out drinking and had burritos and stuff like that. And my weigh-ins went up. So it's like, okay, calories come down on, next week sort of thing. And that kind of just creates this like vicious cycle where it's like, oh, well, if I can pay for Friday and Saturday nights sins by like extra restriction on like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And that can just create like a vicious cycle psychologically for someone because you're trying to solve a human psychology problem with math, right? And it's not the math. The math is not the problem. The problem is the person is sabotaging the next week because they can't commit to actually adhering through a diet because they want to go out drinking every Friday and Saturday night through their diet sort of thing. And you can't fix that problem with a coaching algorithm.
Yeah, so I would say that what I see currently, I wouldn't consider to be AI. It's
Yeah.
not leveraging large language models the way that I would expect to solve problems at scale. It is more someone making that decision tree and saying, this is how I would coach X user, but the user is not the same. And that behavior aspect is really important. And I think that there could be huge improvements in that area. But I would agree that the current tools that exist, they may be good, but I don't think they're leveraging that technology yet.
Agreed. They're good for certain types of people who do not have like emotional attachments to foods and those sorts of things. And that there's no empathy in them. And that's where like a human coach, when you have that client who maybe she just needs a bone, this week, she needs an extra refeed day or a couple days away from tracking because stress is really high. There is some emotional thing. And if you push her really hard again and reduce her calories, like she might literally quit. Like
Mhm.
how do you build that constraint into a coaching algorithm? Like that's where like human empathy and having an actual coaching relationship with someone is important because objectively, that scenario I just gave, like, is the wrong decision. If the goal is to get to X in X number of weeks, that is the wrong decision to make because you're giving them more calories where adherence wasn't great and those sorts of things. But the other side of that is like if I stick to the algorithm, client exits program. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I think it's like those sorts of things where there's a lot of fringe use cases is pretty much what I'm saying. And navigating those via a coaching algorithm is there's a lot of challenges to it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think there's just also the piece of when you have a coach in person, there's just an accountability piece where like they're scared to let you down. And no
Mhm.
one is scared to let an app down, right? Like no matter how savvy you are with notifications, it's just a problem I find really interesting as someone kind of being in the tech and AI side is I feel like there's something really tangible about, the fear of letting someone down that currently doesn't exist in any software.
Agreed.
Cool. So I want to go back to nutrition. We talked about, what you do when you travel. Uh, Most people end up at a grocery store or a Costco. I know when you were in the US, you used to shop at Costco. I'm curious if you have any tips or any pro moves for people shopping at Costco.
Costco's difficult because it's not set up like a traditional grocery store. Um, well, I'll give kind of two. We'll go through like a traditional grocery store. Typically, if you're like really new to the nutrition game and maybe you're not really interested into like tracking macros and counting calories and all of that stuff, some of the best advice that I received at that period of my life was like, don't go down the aisles in the middle. Stick to the perimeter of the grocery store. And that's going to take you through like your fresh fruits and vegetables. And you get some like eggs and meat and stuff around the back, and maybe some of like the frozen stuff, or maybe some bread around the side. Like, don't go down the aisles where there's like just a lot of crap and things that are going to be really appealing, but not overly helpful if prioritizing your health and nutrition is a larger life goal you have. In terms of Costco, don't go on Sundays. Right, that's my biggest piece of advice. I actually saw another one in. I think when I was still living in the States full time, that I think what do they call it? Not DoorDash. What's the food delivery? Is it Instacart?
Yeah, I use Instacart all the time for Costco.
Okay. And that's the hack I saw. I was like, you can avoid the crazy lines and stuff and just Costco madhouse by using Instacart at Costco. So someone else goes and gets it all for you and
Yeah,
brings
you
it to
you
you and you
pay an
just
extra
avoid it.
maybe 5-10%, but I have my groceries delivered from Costco 8:30 in the morning on a Saturday, and I'm like, I'm done grocery shopping for the weekend, and it's still
Yeah.
cheaper than going to like an average grocery store and buying chicken breasts and some of the items because it's
Mhm.
so cheap at Costco.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to really enjoy Costco besides the like, parking lot and all that stuff. Um, but like eggs, egg whites, the vegetables are hard to buy like in massive quantities because of obviously they're the short shelf life. Um, be weary of some of the prepared meats, that are going to have a lot of the marinades are can be quite high in calories and those sorts of things, especially with some of the fat. So like be weary of that a little bit. But yeah, I used to really love going to Costco. And if I'm being honest, um, as corny as it sounds, like these are the sorts of things that get me excited about like whenever I move back to the States, but it's like getting stuff from Costco again. Like Faye makes a lactose free like Greek yogurt, and I'm like, man, I could have Greek yogurt for the first time in like 4 years. Like little things like that. It's kind of corny, but where I live, it's like those things are just they're not even on the radar of possibility.
I get it. My friends were visiting from Europe, and, like, he lands, and within a few hours, he's like, "Can we go to Costco?" I'm like, "Yeah, we can go." He's like, "I wanna stock up so much stuff I can't get." I'm like, "For sure, man, we can go."
Yeah,
Cool. So I wanna move things on to, the training side of things. I'm
sure.
curious, what are your 3 favorite upper body lifts for hypertrophy? And in the context of, you find them effective, but you enjoy them as well.
Yeah. So the first I would say would be a unilateral cable pull down, like a supported unilateral cable pull down for like the lat. That would be definitely one of my favorites. Um, a close second would be, instead of the pull down, like a high to low orientation with the cable, you can do more of just like a horizontal, like you bring the pulley height down in more of a row. Again, very good way to support it, so you're not worrying about bracing and twisting or anything like that. You can really drive a lot of force through the lat. I really, really like those. So that covers the back. In terms of chest, I've always been a big fan of like a low incline dumbbell bench press. So maybe one notch less steep. So like, let's say you have flat bench, maybe 2 or 3 notches takes you up to like a traditional incline. So maybe 1 or 2 clicks down. Like a low incline, that's definitely a favorite of mine. But like a converging chest press machine that's going to be really, really nice. Like an upright one. That would be up there for me. And dips. I've always loved dips. I've always done a lot of them over the years. So yeah, I would say those would be my kind of 3 if I had to choose, maybe 3 of them for upper body. Yeah.
Sweet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some images on the screen of a few pro wrestlers, and tell me what workout would you do that with them if you could in person.
Okay.
So the first one is Stone Cold.
Okay. In terms of like, what are we training?
Yeah, you get to work out with Stone Cold. What are you doing?
All right. So, I mean, Stone Cold looks to me like someone who's didn't really do too much serious training. So maybe we'll train something like delts or arms. So it's like not too intensive a session, because I don't think he would be too down for that.
Awesome.
The Ultimate Warrior, we'd be training legs for sure.
Trading legs? You don't want to trade arms with the Ultimate Warrior?
Well, we already trained arms with Stone Cold, so.
Okay. I got one more here for you. It's Hogan.
Oh man, I feel like he was the one to train arms with. So we'll train delts with Stone Cold. We'll definitely train legs with Ultimate Warrior, because I know Ultimate Warrior was like actually competing in bodybuilding and stuff before he went into
I didn't know that.
pro wrestling. Yeah. And then we'll train arms with Hulkamania.
Awesome. All right. So I'm going to finish things off with kind of a fun question here. I'm curious, what is your Mount Rushmore, your top 4 video games for the N64 console?
Oh, Ocarina of Time, for sure. Duke Nukem 64.
Duke Nukem 64. Okay.
Yeah, that was one I really, really liked. It was probably just, I was quite impressionable, and there was like bad language and like, drugs and stuff in it. And I was like 9, and I was like, okay, I like this, now maybe not so much. GoldenEye for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And then of course GoldenEye, and then Mario Kart for sure.
Mario Kart.
Yeah.
WCW versus NWO doesn't make your top 4?
I didn't have that one for N64. I remember the first one. I had the PlayStation 1. I had one of the WWF games on that, but I definitely didn't have it for N64.
Awesome. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Can you tell everyone where they can find you?
Yeah. So I would say easiest would be Instagram. It's Aaron_Straker. I have a website, strakernutritionco.com. I also host a weekly podcast, and you can find that at Eat, Train, Prosper.
Awesome. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.